Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's session in our Go Digital Western Cape webinar series. It's brought to you by the Department of Economic Development and Tourism from the Western Cape Government, and my name is Robert Davids. I'm from the Digital Economy Unit at the department, and I will be your host for today's session. So firstly, to all our audience members who have joined us today, thank you very much for your interest and for your participation and for joining us in the session today. Our webinar series, for those of you who have not joined us on the Go Digital webinar series before, it's an initiative of the Digital Economy Unit here at our department, and it generally covers areas around the digitalization of businesses, digital systems, processes, and everything in between. Of course, this is generally something which is quite important to business and is a big part of the work that we do at our department and at our unit, but also specifically within this era and this context of COVID-19 that we find ourselves in. The digitalization of businesses and systems and processes are becoming increasingly relevant and important. So this webinar series is part of an extended initiative of the department to provide resources, support and information to businesses across the Western Cape during this time. I would just like to do a quick bit of housekeeping, if I can call it that. As you see today, our program on the screen, but in order for us to have a nice smooth running session with no hitches, we would just ask our audience to please bear with these requests from our side. Firstly, I'd like to inform you that our webinar is being recorded. This is because we'll be making it available after the session. Then secondly, if I could just reiterate, we kindly request that you turn off all your video and all your audio if you're not one of the presenters. And this is just to enable the presentations to go smoothly and without any interruptions. Then also another request to the audience, we will not be taking questions during the actual presentations. So we ask you to please post your questions in the chat window. There is a button for the chat room, which you can post questions in the chat window on your right-hand side. At the end of the presentations, we'll have a moderator sessions where we'll ask the panelists to respond to some of your questions. That assuming that we have enough time to do so. So we kindly ask your understanding and indulgence on that request. And then the last, if you are quite active on social media, we ask you to use the hashtag #GoDigitalWesternCape. So that's it from the housekeeping side, and we can jump straight into today's session from here onwards. So our series today covers the topic which you've seen, obviously, which we're calling a legal bootcamp for your online business. Now, the legalities of doing business can be quite intricate. And as we are moving into the online space for business, into digitalization of systems and processes and how we deal with the customers and markets, it's really important, we believe, as businesses and for the economy to understand what are the legalities that go hand in hand with doing business online. And the legal aspects are something which not all of us in the business sector always feel like doing. It's something we know is very important and very valuable to the smooth running of our businesses, but it's something that is sometimes neglected in terms of how much attention people play to it. And yet it's such a crucial and such a critical part of how we do conduct business, especially in the space of e-commerce and anything else that goes online. And that can cover everything from how to interact with your customers in an online space, what your rights are as a business and as a marketer in the online space, data privacy, even something as simple as which kind of media, photos, information you can share online. So it's quite a broad field, and it's something which can be daunting or difficult to navigate if you don't know where to start. And for that reason, we have Michalsons law firm joining us here today. As you saw in the invitation, we have David Luyt and Kevin Hoole, and they're going to help us navigate the space. And Michalsons is a very prestigious law firm. They really are the experts in this field. and they've been doing these things for years. So today, David and Kevin are going to share some insights, some tips, and hopefully answer some questions which will help you as businesses in the digital space to navigate this better. And hopefully it will spark more awareness and possibly more questions for you. But it's something which we feel is quite important and critical for us to grasp, especially within the context that we are now. So without further ado, because I'm obviously not the expert today, I'm going to hand over to David Luyt. As you can see, there's a short bio of his on the screen, which you can read as we go along. And thereafter, Kevin will also join us. And David and Kevin will do a bit of a tag team today. And we're really excited to have both of you on board with us today, David and Kevin. So we're looking forward to the presentation. And with that, I will think I'll hand over to you. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. David here. Robert, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you to you and the Department of Economic Development and Tourism for having us along. Very excited to be here today. Yeah, I'll just introduce myself and my colleague Kevin briefly. We are lawyer nerds. What we mean by that is we love technology, we love the law, and we get to behave in the space where the two things overlap. We're both different kinds of nerds. So I'm a theater nerd, an acting nerd. Kev's a gaming nerd. I'm also a gaming nerd, but we're all kinds of nerds. Kev, feel free to chip in if I'm doing you a disservice here. But
no, not at all.
Yeah, not at all. But yeah, great. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Michalsons as well before we get started. So we are a specialist law firm. We don't do everything. We pick a few things and we do them well. So we do online business, we do data protection, we do cybersecurity, we do electronic signatures, what I like to call nerd law. So if you are getting divorced, don't give us a call. There are other lawyers who can help you with that. But if you're the victim of a cyber attack, we're the people to chat to. But yeah, maybe we just get into an introduction of what we're talking about today. I'm going to share my screen if that's all right. Let's just get that going. Brilliant. Fantastic. So you'll see this Prezi in front of us. And really what this is an interactive mind map that's going to help us guide our discussion today. And what we're really talking about here is this idea of online business. Now, this term online business is broad. It includes e-commerce. It includes traditional businesses that are going online for the first time. And really this idea that I want to hook what we're talking about on today is that whether you believe in online or not, online believes in you. So whether you have a website or whether you're interacting online, out there, people are talking about you on the internet. People are reviewing you on things like Yelp. They're talking about you on Twitter. So whether you're online or not, you're going to end up there. And in this coronavirus world that we find ourselves in, where our physical presence has been reduced, more and more businesses are forced to go online, and the online space is becoming the only place to do business, which is why I think Robert's framed our discussion as being so important today. So let's jump into that. And Kevin's actually going to kick us off with a little discussion of the relationships that are so important when it comes to online businesses. Over to you, Kev.
Great. Yeah, cool. I think, thanks, David. Thanks for the introduction as well. One of the things that I want to just mention before we get into all of the nitty gritty is that there are a significant number of different things that we can talk about when dealing with online businesses. David, you mentioned things about how people could be leaving reviews for you on Yelp, or things where you're not even you are not as a business present in an online space, but your customers very much are. And so you can get into things like Google reviews, where your business isn't even in an online space. You don't even know that these reviews are being posted about you. And you can deal with things like defamation of your business on forums. There are so many areas to overlap with that we cannot actually physically deal with them all in this particular hour session that we have. Yes. So we've picked out a couple of niche points that we think apply to the broadest possible spectrum of online businesses, be it a store, be it a service, be it a platform. And we're going to walk through them, and hopefully we'll hit 90% of what it is that you're concerned about.
Yeah, so we're very much trying to do a greatest hits exercise today. So we're not going deep, but we're going wide.
Yeah. And yeah, as David said, we're going to be starting off with relationships. In preparation for this webinar, I was just doing a couple of Google searches as to some of the things that people in South Africa, be it consumer groups, be it lawyers, have written about, and in terms of online businesses and helping people understand the legal matters revolving around this. And one of the things I noticed is that they speak mainly about the acts that apply. A lot of these articles talk about the CPA. A lot of them talk about the Electronic Communications and Transactions Acts, abbreviated to ECTA. A lot of them talk about POPIA, which isn't yet in force, but is coming. But that's all standard stuff. That's all stuff that everyone, I think, knows. And honestly, to deal with that as a business, that's not your job. That's the lawyer's job. Exactly. And if you wanted to get a handle on it yourself, you would be doing a lot of studying. And if you can, that's fantastic. But I'm just thinking about how we will talk about returns and refund policies a little bit later on. And that, if I remember correctly from my days of studying, that was like that was a good couple of days. I think we devoted a week or so to that specific section. And that's something that you as a business cannot afford to do yourself. Yeah.
And I think it's that old adage of, businesses need a hole in the wall. They don't care about the drill. We'll worry about the drill. You need the hole in the wall. So that's what we're talking about today. We're trying to keep the session practical and insightful and not get into too much of the legal nitty-gritty, really.
Yeah. And but one of the things that you can do as a business, and this will help lawyers as well, and even if you decide to in the future go out and do the legal legwork yourself, that's perfectly fine. The place that we like to start is on the relationships. And what we mean by the relationships is the actual connection between you as a business and your customer. What is it that you're providing them? Are you providing them with goods? Are you providing them with services? How many different customer types have you got? Are you an online store, an online service, an online platform? As soon as you can identify your actual relationship and in point of fact, actually put it into a diagram, that will really, really help clarify the legal relationships. So David, if we can pop into online store,
sure.
If we go through these little bubbles, we'll show you some of the common ones that we've seen. So most common example is an online store selling physical goods. There you have your store as the central hub. You have a lot of different customers that are not connected. They're buying individual items from you. The one might be buying a toaster. The other might be buying a pair of shoes. That's a fairly simple relationship to set out. You just have to have terms that dictate what kind of a service you're providing to them. You're providing them with a sales service of goods, and maybe you might be doing the delivery yourself. Maybe you might be having a third party doing it. Maybe you're not providing any delivery and the customer has to come to you. You just need to set out and understand that kind of a setup. If we move on to the online service, an online service could be exactly the same as an online store. If you look at the left-hand trio, that's exactly the same as an online store. The difference there is that what's being provided is a service, not goods. An example of this would be, let's say you contract with someone online to provide you with graphic design work or something like that. Freelancers often actually could be classified as an online service provider because you tend never really to interact with them in person, sometimes, depending on what they are.
We're certainly online service providers.
Yeah, exactly. One of the other types of online service provider is the two variations that we have over here are a one-to-one relationship on the left and a one-to-many relationship on the right. Now, a one-to-many would be classified as something, or an example of that rather, would be something along the lines of Netflix, where it's the same service that you're providing to multiple customers. There, you don't have to worry about negotiating with one particular customer the fact that it's going to be 100 Rand for the service. And for another particular customer, okay, no, it's going to be 110 Rand for that service. It's the same service you're providing to everyone, but you want to try and define what kind of service you're providing and how you're providing it. Is it different between the clients? And then the third major sort of variation of this would be an online platform. It's a different kind of flavor of an online service. And there are a lot of different kinds of flavors of online service. But the main one with online platforms, sometimes online marketplaces, is a different sort of name for it. But that's also potentially just a different sort of flavor of it. The main difference here is that there is an actual relationship between the different users. So if we take the Netflix example, that's an online service where I, with my Netflix subscription, do not have a relationship with David with his Netflix subscription. We cannot interact with one another at all. But if we go to something like Gumtree or something like Facebook, that is an online platform, and it allows us as different users to have a relationship between one another. So if we take the platform provider as being Gumtree, it is providing a service to the to two different classes of clients, two different classes of user of that online service. Yeah. The one being a vendor who is wanting to sell their goods, and the other being a buyer who's wanting to purchase the goods. David might be trying to sell his old washing machine. I might be wanting to buy it. And Gumtree would want to tell its users, okay, you've got general service terms that apply to both of you equally. You can do this on the platform. You can't do that on the platform. But David, you as a vendor have to do X, Y, and Z. And Kevin, you as a buyer have to do A, B, and C. So there might be extra terms that apply to the different classes of vendors. There may even be some instance in which the platform provider says, okay, if you guys are going to interact with one another, you have to at least do it on these particular terms. That's why there's a question mark in between the middle of it. But largely speaking, the relationship between the vendor and the buyer is conducted between the vendor and the buyer, and you don't need to worry about it.
Yes, and often the platform provider ends up sort of brokering this relationship between the two entities. And I think the other thing to understand is often there's a continuum between these things. You know, you might start off with an online store selling your goods to one person, and then you might find, hey, my online store is so successful, I've got other people who make similar goods who want to sell to my customers on my platform, and then suddenly your online store becomes an online platform. Do you agree with me there, Kev? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we can see it with with Facebook as well. Facebook started out as a one-to-many online service. Simple, just that, really. Didn't really have much of a focus on any sort of marketplace terms or anything like that, but now they've brought out Facebook Marketplace. It's shifted to a more, I mean, arguably it was always an online platform, but it is now more specifically a marketplace flavor of a kind of platform.
Yeah. Yeah. And also think with these sort of different frameworks, relationships you're looking at the moment, a lot of businesses are looking at the online space as some new area they're moving into and thinking, okay, I need a store. And they're looking at this idea of a platform and thinking that sounds like science fiction. I'm never going to get there. But so often the platform grows out of your store at the end of the day, or your online service. I think it's important to see where you could end up if you continue down this online road, which is why it's useful to understand this.
And the final point that I will make on this is that when trying to understand the relationships, because you need to understand the relationships in order to draft the legal documents at the end of the day. Yeah. If you don't understand the relationships, your documents could be completely inappropriate. The thing that I use as the best tool in trying to draw these diagrams is to actually follow the money. Who is paying whom for what service, and what is that service? If you can create a little diagram with those two arrows between the client and between the vendor and the buyer, between all of those various bubbles, and understand, okay, this is the service and this is the payment between these two people. Even if there are 3 or 4 or 5 different people, you want to be able to understand what connection all of those various people have with one another.
Yeah, great.
Once you do, drafting the document is actually a cakewalk.
It becomes very easy. Well, brilliant, Kev. Thanks for framing those relationships. I'm going to jump over to our case studies, if you're cool with that. So really what I want to talk about here is, okay, we've got these 3 kind of relationships in mind, but let's hook them on practical examples, little stories that we can have in the back of our minds to kind of frame our conversation today. So the first example I want to give you is an idea for an online store. And this isn't my personal online store business. If you're looking for an online business to build out there, I was watching a very interesting video about sort of 20 kinds of business ideas for the coronavirus world that some people think are going to be big. And this was one that sort of spoke to me. So an online store, obviously, the typical situation, you're selling physical goods in exchange for money online, and you're delivering them to customers, or someone's delivering them on your behalf. And the story I want you to bear in mind here is you are a small nursery or garden services company. You make seedlings that you sell to your customers. And in a pre-coronavirus world, everyone was coming past your store on a Sunday to visit your coffee shop and buy a few seedlings to take home and plant in their garden. Well, suddenly people can't do that anymore. You are forced to sell online. So you've got Plant Gardening Suppliers Pty Limited. You're registered with SIPC as a private company, and you now want to create an online store where people can come and browse all your different seedlings in different categories. They can order them, and they're going to be delivered to your customers. Now, either you have delivery people coming to your premises, provided you're sticking within the laws of lockdown and complying with all those things, and they're then delivering your seedlings to your customers, or you're doing some sort of drop shipping exercise where you're actually a middleman. You're getting your seedlings from other suppliers, and rather than bringing them off to your physical shop where you would then sell them to people face to face, you've just organized for your suppliers to deliver them directly to the customers. So that is a online store selling physical goods, and you've either created this yourself or you've partnered with someone who's got an existing online store. There's so many ways to do it these days. We're not going to get into that today, but somehow you've created an online store. Then let's think about an example of an online service. Okay, so in the same vein of you're this gardening company, another string to your bow might be, well, you know a lot of things about how to grow crops. And a thing that a lot of people are thinking about at the moment is, okay, I'm stuck at home, I'm stuck in my flat even, I don't have access to large quantities of things. I'm kind of worried and nervous about the supply chain of being able to get fresh goods. I'm finding I can't get as many fresh herbs as I would like, so I'm going to start growing my own. Well, you think that you're going to work with people online to teach them about how to grow their own crops. You've identified there's 5 crops that are really easy to grow from home. You can grow carrots in nothing. You can grow radishes overnight, those sorts of things. And you set up a business where you're going to offer sessions. You're going to charge hourly. You're advertising it through your website. And you're going to coach people through how to plant plants. Maybe they're going to do hydroponics in their own flats and grow their vegetables that way. But you're talking to them one-on-one, providing these services over the internet completely. There's no physical component, and you're charging people for that. And the last example is an online platform. So now taking the same idea of gardening, providing people with places where they can go and exercise, and people are working on improving their physical environments because we're all stuck in the same spaces. So it's much better that we can all exercise any time of day now. But, whether you like it or not, we're now restricted in terms of our worlds are smallness. People want to make their worlds prettier. So you identify this need of there's lots of people out there who are very good at providing designs and plans for how gardens look. You've identified a whole group of garden planners and landscapers out there who now have no work. And you see all these customers there who need to landscape their gardens. And you set up this online platform where you can connect the two groups, where you can have the landscapers register a profile and they can charge for their services. Maybe they have predefined plans of how to build your garden. And then the customers, the gardeners all come along and register and they buy the plans from them on their platform. And you're brokering that transaction. You're charging a nominal fee based on every time someone buys a gardening plan. So those are really just 3 examples to frame our discussion today. This idea of 3 kinds of online business that might have to do with gardening, but really framing Kevin's 3 relationships: the online store, the online service, and the online platform. And now Kev's going to take us through the legal terms that you would need for all these sorts of online business.
Yeah, so thanks, Dave. So in terms of the actual sort of legal documentation that you would require, it again really depends on the particular kind of service that you have. So yeah, we could have a variety of different flavors of all of these various terms, but we're just going to be giving you a brief background in the general sort of, words seem to be failing me, a general background as to what the bulk sort of focus areas of these terms are going to be. And the first one that we start with, which is particular to online businesses. You don't tend to have these things on in offline businesses, although there is a variation of this that I will tell you about, are the terms of use. Now, the terms of use, they're generally they're very simple terms. They provide you with very basic protection for the actual website itself. These apply when a internet user comes to your website. If they haven't signed up with you, they haven't purchased anything with you, there's no actual contract between the two of you for a provision of service in the sense that you might be thinking about it right now, where we're actually going to be selling the seedlings, or we're going to be providing you with any of the actual main platform services. But there is technically a service that is being provided. That service is access to the website, the ability for me as a user to come onto your website and see the fact that you provide these various things, and to give me access to your menu, if you will. And so in an offline context, to try and sort of bring an example that people might be familiar with, the terms of use could be likened to the right of admission reserved sign that you see on a restaurant when you walk in. Now, it doesn't really do much apart from say that you're here because I let you in. And these are the general things that you agree to when I let you in. The extent of these terms, as I said earlier, they're very simple. They provide very basic protection. And the reason for this, we'll talk a little bit later about sort of click wrap agreements, but the reason for this is that there is no proof of acceptance of these terms. In online businesses, what we have often is, and David can speak for ages about electronic signatures, but the way that we deal with consent in online businesses are mainly by what we refer to as either a browse wrap agreement or a click wrap agreement. In a browse wrap agreement, you are assumed to have accepted the terms of something by virtue of the fact that you are browsing that site. And that's generally what terms of use cover. Obviously, there's no way that you can prove that I've actually seen those terms of use and that I have actually accepted them. So what people tend to do in these terms of use is they keep the obligations imposed by those terms of use to be very, very minimal. And they're very standard things, like you agree not to steal the IP off of this website, so sort of like images or any other intellectual property that we have in having built this website. You agree not to scrape content from the website or deep link to the website and bypass ad walls and things like that. Generally,
I mean,
terms of use are
sorry,
used
just one question from my side that a lot of people I get from clients is they say, okay, why do I need terms of use? And I think this is a broader discussion about what legal terms do. You know, the old school view was, okay, well, I don't want to get into legal trouble. That's why I need legal terms. At some point, I'm going to have a problem. I'm going to go to court and someone's going to need these terms to decide what happens. Practically, that's not what happens, because if you're going to court to fight a dispute, everyone's lost. The only people who win are the lawyers. So a lot of time, what your legal terms are actually there to do is manage expectations and also to telegraph the fact that you're taking business seriously. And for me, that's the real value of terms of use. Yes, they cover all the sort of basic legal things, but I'm caring enough to, you know, if you go to premises, going back to the rights of admission reserved sign analogy there, Kev, is if you go to a physical premises and you see that rights of admission reserved sign, part of your brain thinks, oh, I can rest easy. This is a serious business. They care about who comes into the premises. The same thing happens when you see terms of use on a website. You realize it's a legitimate website that you want to do business with. And I see the value there. Yeah.
And then moving on to the more bulky terms, the actual core content of what it is that you are wanting to cover from a legal perspective is your terms of service. In an online business, this can be referred to as a terms of sale because there's no real service that's being provided. It's actually just goods that are being purchased. But the point is that these terms, they're more complex. They deal with the general legal relationship between the service provider or the seller and the buyer or user, and they provide you with a lot more advanced protection than the terms of use will do. They'll cover things like who owns intellectual property in providing the actual service, who is liable for what if something goes wrong, what is the general jurisdiction of the contract. And because these terms are so much more onerous on the person accepting them, the law requires you to be a little bit clearer as to whether or not these terms have been accepted. So what ends up happening there is we don't want to have a browse wrap agreement. We want to have a click wrap agreement. And ideally, you'd want to have things like two-factor authentication, making sure that people are who they say they are, and you've proven that they've actually seen or acknowledged these terms. But in general, what ends up happening is someone signs into your website, they create a user profile, or they add stuff to their cart, and in checkout, what they say is by clicking checkout or by clicking accept, you accept these terms. And there's an actual button that they click, a little tick box often that you put in there, and that is then enough to say that you have drawn attention to the fact that legal terms apply. Whether or not they've actually read these legal terms, you cannot possibly hope to prove. But you can try as hard as you can to make sure that you've drawn attention to it, so that if anything happens and you are taken to court or something, and someone says, "Hey, but I didn't actually look at these things," then you can say, "Well, we drew your attention to it. We gave you the bundle of documents on your desk. The fact that you didn't page through them is not our problem."
Yeah, I mean, often where a dispute might happen is, let's say you sold someone, let's go back to the seedlings example, you sold them a plant and it had some sort of fungus in it that kind of infected other people's plants, and they try and sue you for the entire value of all the plants that you've lost. You would then point them to your limitation of liability clause in your terms of service and say, "Listen, our liability was limited to the fees you paid me. I'll give you back the money for the plant, but I'm not liable for all the damage I caused to all your plants." So that's a practical example there.
Or at least provided that your liability section actually does put that in. And this is again sort of referring to the fact that these terms of service are not one size fits all. Unfortunately, we can never create a one size fits all kind of thing because of the variation in the businesses types, in the relationship types. And some examples of these, like I said, are terms of sale, terms of service. Platform terms will also have there. You'll have much more robust terms of service in your platform terms. And then the final thing is your order. And these are your more specific commercial terms. Obviously, in your terms of service, you're not going to be putting in things like for a basil seedling, you're going to be paying 15 Rand. For a parsley seedling, you're going to be paying 20 Rand. You don't put those into your terms of service. You put those terms into your actual orders. And these orders could be, they're like David zoomed in there, they're essentially your menu to select from. And in a offline context, this would be something like a statement of work. It would be a little document that details the commercial specifics of the relationship. But in an online context, it can be even simpler, particularly if it's goods that you're providing or a standard service. It's as simple as a web form that says what you are getting by clicking accept is a 1 month subscription to Netflix, and you're paying 100 Rand for it. Or you're getting 3 seedlings and you're paying 30 Rand per seedling, something like that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, also the trick here, and the reason we separate them out often, is the customer cares about the order. You know, I want to know what coffee I'm getting, what seedling I'm getting. I don't care about all the legal guff, but it does need to be there. So you want to separate it out.
And on that particular order form, on that web form, that is where you get people to do your click, where it connects them to the various terms of service, the privacy policy, all of the other documents that you have that you want them to acknowledge agreement of.
Exactly.
And I think that's pretty much all that I've got in terms of the legal terms. Obviously, we can deal with a lot more things like privacy policy, cookie notices, returns and refunds, but those are specific sections of their own. And I think David is going to be moving through into privacy now.
Great. Yeah, we're just going to touch on a few elements of privacy here. So privacy is a big topic, right? And it's often a hot topic when it comes to online businesses now, because data protection laws around the world are getting increased airtime, and a lot of high profile ones have commenced, and we've seen high profile things happening in terms of them. So things people will know about are things like Edward Snowden blowing the whistle, which kind of led to the Facebook cases and things like that. In more recent years, we've seen things in South Africa. We had things like the master deeds breach a number of years ago, where a huge database of homeowners' data leaked onto the public web. We've had big South African financial services providers on national TV on Sunday nights talking about how they were hacked and things like that. So privacy is something on everyone's lips. And it sounds like a big topic, but the unfortunate thing and what the reality of it is, if you're taking your business and moving into an online space, you're moving into a space where information is your currency. When you're selling seedlings to someone, you get their name and their email address, you get their street address. That is information. You are bartering that information in order to provide your services. Therefore, privacy and data protection law affects you. And let's just touch on a few things that you need to think about when it comes to privacy for your online store. So the first thing, as Kev talked about, is your privacy policy. So what is a privacy policy? It is a written plan of action for how your business is going to handle your customer's personal data. So it tells your customer that if you give me your personal data, this is what I'm going to use it for. This is what I'm not going to use it for. If you don't like the way I'm using it, this is what you can do about it. The reason it's so important in an online business thing is where privacy and information, or where information is the currency and privacy is how you protect it, then your privacy policy becomes how you establish trust online. If I'm going to do business with an online business and I don't see a privacy policy, it's very unlikely that I'm going to want to give them my credit card details, or typically the online store actually passes those across to a payment gateway, but from the user's perspective, they don't really see that. But even then is a passing on of the information. But I'm not going to trust you unless I see that privacy policy. And if you look at what people actually read when it comes to legal terms, the terms of service, the terms of use, they're like the right of admission sign. They're important to be there, but no one's actually reading those unless something goes wrong. But often what people do click through, and they will at least skim, is your privacy policy, because they're cognizant, at least subconsciously, of the fact that I am giving my personal information to you as part of this transaction, and I want to know what you're going to do with it. So that is sort of the carrot reason for why you want a privacy policy. In terms of the stick reason, there are data protection laws around the world that require you to have privacy policies. We don't really have time, but as sort of a very broad headline, South Africa's data protection law is something called PAPIA, the Protection of Personal Information Act. It still hasn't commenced fully yet. We have a regulator, but they haven't set a commencement date for legislation. There was a rumor it was going to be the 1st of April. It wasn't. It's not here yet. We feel like the law firm that cried wolf. It could be here at any time. We don't know. But the rest of the world has moved on. GDPR is Europe's umbrella data protection law. It commenced on the 25th of May, 2018. I hope I'm getting that date right. But it's been around for a long time. And even that is an update to data protection law that's existed in Europe, sort of since the late 90s. So it's been around a long time, and we're late to this party. So whether we have data protection law or not, the expectation in the world is that any kind of online business have a privacy policy. So you really can't afford to ignore that. And the next document you got to think about is your cookie notice. This is a little bit more of a recent development in some ways, but really a cookie is a small text file that a website loads on your computer so that it can identify you as a user. So that and when you see it practically is if you go and shop at an online store and you come back and it says, hey, you put these goods in your cart, but you didn't buy them before. Do you want to buy them this time? The website's remembering you. Now, there's a piece of legislation in Europe that's a sister to their umbrella data protection legislation called the e-privacy regulation. And that came out a few years ago and obliged everyone to get specific consent for cookies, particularly if you're dealing with EU residents. So that's why all websites these days, you see these annoying cookie notices where you say, we use cookies to enhance the website experience. Do you click accept to have them? And it's not a case of websites are suddenly using cookies. They've been using them for years, but now they have to bring it to your attention. So if you are using cookies, and particularly if you want to do business with European customers, and if you're doing online business, the world is your customer base, you want to have a cookie notice to comply with those laws.
Yeah, if I can just add something into
Sure.
that on cookie notices, the sort of general view that I get a lot from potential clients and stuff is that cookie notices are something that are very, very minor, something that they don't really ever think about. I think it's possibly because of the silly name that it has, the fact that it's a small text file. They think that the potential danger of it is very, very low. I mean, what the website is just simply tracking the fact that I've had something in my cart before and it's remembered it, so it makes it easier for me. Fantastic. But there are a lot more dangerous potential uses for cookies. So, for instance, when you go onto Takealot and search for a particular blender, and then you go onto Gumtree and you see adverts for blenders, and you see on YouTube adverts for blenders appearing around and around and around, these are all because of cookies. There are many relationships behind the scenes, behind the websites, and between all of the various websites that you use, where advertisers will ask the website to put cookies onto your device for advertising purposes. Google does this a lot. That's why you see a lot of the same kinds of ads appearing over and over and over. And that is what the GDPR and the PECR are trying to protect against. The fact that some people don't want Google to know that they've been on Takealot looking for a blender. Some people don't want Amazon to know that they searched this particular search query into Google. And so they want to give, the GDPR and the PECR want to give you the right to say, as a consumer, I don't want you to track me using cookies. I don't want you to be able to track what I'm doing.
So organizations have been abusing cookies in many ways, which is why there's a need for the legislation. Great.
Sorry, I think I took out a little bit too much time, but that is something that I'm a little bit annoyed with as a lawyer myself. Yeah,
understandably. I'm just going to pick up the pace a little bit so we can cover everything, but I don't want to cram too much into today. We've got about 15 minutes left. We want to allow some time for questions, but let's touch on two other things here. So one other thing that your website needs to deal with privacy is your PIO manual. That's your promotion of access to information manual. A lot of businesses had these already. They do need to be updated in terms of POPIA when that commences. That's just something to bear in mind. Essentially, it's a document that explains how people can get information out of your organization and who they need to ask to get that information. Then the last thing I want to talk about are data processing agreements. So this is really hooks on the idea that no organization is an island. And let's go back to the example of the online store selling seedlings. That online store selling seedlings doesn't provide all its functions on its own. It's got someone providing them with compost. It's got someone providing them with the actual seedlings. It's got a web developer producing the website for them. It might have some sort of credit bureau helping check whether if it's selling seedlings on credit, whether those people are credit worthy. And it really means that we all process personal information in conjunction with other people. And in terms of the law, you're obliged to enter into written agreements with those people that govern those sharing relationships. And for a small online store, you could probably just roll that into your terms of service. But the more complex your offering is in terms of the way you sell information, let's say you're an online service and you're in the financial services space, for example, there's lots of highly sensitive personal information trading hands there. The obligation to have a written agreement becomes far more important there. So Kev, back to you. We're just going to discuss returns and refunds briefly. Kev, if you wouldn't mind just taking sort of 3-4 minutes on that one, I'd be grateful. But
yeah, sure. No, so there is a lot that we can say, but the Cliff Notes version of this is that a returns and refunds policy is mainly beneficial to you as an online business because it, as David mentioned earlier, it telegraphs what it is that the process is going to be. A lot of consumers say that, oh, you as an online business have done me wrong because you're against the CPA, but they don't say how you're against the CPA. So if what you can do in your returns policy is set out, this is what the process is for returns, and make sure that you have got it in line with the CPA, you short circuit a lot of the complaints that you receive. They'll look at your returns policy and go, okay, you know what? They've covered all of the times that we can return and things that we can't do. So they're not going to pick up too much of a stink as customers. The main areas that the returns policy will deal with will be your CPA and your ECTA, the electronic goods and the electronic
communications and transactions.
Communications and transactions. Sorry, the C just disappeared. CPA obviously applies to offline services as well. ECTA applies to the online services. The main distinction between the two is that CPA does not have a general right of return. So I can't return the jersey that I bought just because I don't like the color anymore or the fit. But the ECTA does allow a general right of return. So if after 7 days I've bought something from Takealot, dislike it completely for no reason, I can send it back within 7 days. And that's something that you need to take into account when drafting your returns policy online.
And in terms of a quick win coming out of today's webinar, a lot of websites have the other stuff we've talked about. You can kind of find some stock standard terms of use, terms of service, and privacy policies out there and bung them on your website. But very few of them have returns and refunds policies. And this is often, if you want to level up your online store, this is something that can really make you stand out amongst the competition that doesn't have these sorts of documents. So if you actually go to our website, you'll find free terms and conditions, and you can get the basics, because we are quite frankly sick and tired of people finding terms of use, terms of service, and privacy policies out there on the web that do not work for a South African online store and sticking them on their website. So we created free ones that you can go and grab there. And if you want to chat to us about a returns and refunds policy on top of that, that's something we can help you with. Let's touch on marketing quickly. So I just want to talk about two ways that you might want to market your online business and how the law speaks to that. So a big one that most businesses have is some sort of email marketing list. The quick thing to understand here is currently we are living how Europe sort of lived in the 90s when it comes to direct marketing, in that you're allowed to go and get people's contact details from anywhere you can and market to them with impunity. It's very frustrating as a consumer, but provided you give them an opportunity to opt out. So there's rules in terms of WASP's codes and things like that. If you're doing like SMS marketing and things like that, how you have to give them the right to opt out. But essentially, you can keep contacting them until they say, don't contact me anymore. Now, that's all going to change when POPIA comes into being. And in fact, in Europe, that changed long ago. But basically, we're going to move into an opt-in regime. So an opt-in regime is I'm supposed to contact you once and say, do you want to know about my seedlings? If you don't respond positively and say, yes, I'd like to know about your seedlings, then I'm not supposed to contact you again. There's some gray areas there where you can potentially sweeten the deal. Some people do it with competitions and say, hey, to enter our competition, you have to sign up for our mailing list, and you kind of dangle a carrot there to get people permission from people. There's also some question about when does that permission go stale? So is it really I have one chance ever in the fullness of time to ask you, or is it a case of I can ask you every 6 months? And there's no legal rule there, but typically it depends on the kind of thing that you're asking someone about. So let's say, for example, you were selling motor vehicle insurance. Well, people typically change their cars every sort of 5 years or so. Therefore, it's reasonable to ask them every 5 years or so would be an argument there. So that if you want to ask people more frequently, there's an argument to say that you could do it on the basis of that. But that's the important thing to understand with direct marketing in the form of email. And another way a lot of people market their businesses is through social media. We know that purse strings are short and budgets are tight in this post-coronavirus world, and a lot of people are looking at social media as a free way to get advertising. It's important to remember that social media has a lot of its own legal concerns. A lot of the ones we've seen in South Africa are to do with employees doing things on social media. And that's the unfortunate thing is you give employees a voice within your business if they're on social media, whether you like it or not. They have their own social media presence. And the one case I want to talk about was a very funny case that came out of the CCMA, where essentially employees called their boss a very ugly man with a dark soul. And they talked about two dumb brats running a Mickey Mouse business on their public Facebook pages. And obviously this could be tied back to the brand of the business. It was a huge kind of fiasco for them. They tried to dismiss the employees. And it was actually a court case where they investigated whether they had infringed their privacy by looking at these things that they posted. And it was in the old days of Facebook when your default setting was your public wall, and therefore they had found that they hadn't infringed their privacy because they posted it publicly. It would be a different story if they posted it in a private forum. So it's to know that Facebook can be a useful advertising playground, or any kind of social media, rather, not just Facebook, but that there are, that case and happened to involve Facebook, but there are legal concerns to bear in mind there. So Kev's now going to chat about acceptable use. Kev, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. There's not really a hell of a lot that we can say about acceptable use in such a very short time, except to say that acceptable use policies are mainly used where your business has some kind of interactive component to it with its users, either a social media element or a way that the user can engage with your service more than just receiving it. So, for instance, if you have a website that has a community chat room or a forum or something like that, you might want acceptable use terms in there to make sure that people aren't being racist or derogatory or inflammatory or posting things that they shouldn't post online. So Facebook will very clearly have a acceptable use policy. Another instance would be where the service that you're providing is something like an app. or a thing where there is a constant back and forth between the user and the service. It's not just a one and done. In situations like that, you would have the acceptable use say, okay, guys, you can do X, Y, and Z with our software as a service, with our app. You cannot do A, B, and C, and that would include things like you can't reverse engineer the source code or something from the app. And you can post pictures, but the pictures must not be of content that children under the age of 13 are not allowed to see, or something like that. Yeah, there's a lot that we can go into about acceptable use, but it really is very specific to the type of
platform. And I mean, just tying it back to social media, often if you have like a Facebook page or group, you have opportunity to post your own community rules. And I mean, that is a kind of acceptable use policy about what you will and won't allow in your community, which is something else to bear in mind there. But great, thanks very much, Kev. Then just the last stop on our journey today, I want to talk about security. And this is the unfortunate thing that the more value you attract, the more people are going to try and steal that value from you or take advantage of that. And as you move into the online space, you unfortunately are going to be exposing yourself to the dark underbelly of cyber criminals and malware and things like that. And I just want to talk about a few of those things that tend to affect online businesses, particularly newer ones that you need to worry about. So these are kinds of incidents that happen, things that go wrong. So it's important to understand an incident is, as this image here is, he hasn't actually slipped. He hasn't actually slipped on the banana yet. He hasn't actually fallen over, but it could happen, right? So an incident is where someone could have got unauthorized access to your personal data, but it's unclear whether they did or didn't. And you still need to take all incidents seriously, because if they did get access to personal data, or they could have, then it does amount to a breach, and you need to deal with that appropriately. But let's look at two common kinds of incidents that affect online businesses. The first is business email compromises. And the typical way this happens, let's go back to our example of the seedling, is that the nursery company is buying a large amount of soil from a soil manufacturer. And the soil manufacturer is sending them an invoice to pay to a certain bank account. Now, typically what the cyber attackers do is they get access to one or more mailboxes, and let's say they happen to hack the gardening supplier company's mailbox, and they know that this invoice is coming in for a certain amount. And then they spoof an email, which is fairly easy to do, to the gardening company saying, oh, we are actually the fertilizer supply company, and we changed our banking details. You owe us 500,000 Rand, rather pay it into the following bank account. And if you do that, the banks are sometimes very good, and they pick up, listen, the person you're trying to pay is not the name associated with this account, and they stop that transaction. But if they don't, it's your fault, because you were tricked into paying this into the wrong account. And the fact that they compromised your mailbox might be the reason they did it. Sometimes it happens on the other end. It's actually the supplier whose mailbox gets hacked. But as people get access to mailboxes, this is typically where this sort of thing occurs. There's been lots of these things happening in South Africa. There have been high-profile ones in the legal profession of people keeping money in conveyancing transactions and paying it across to the wrong party and things like that. It causes huge problems. Another kind of incident that affects a lot of online businesses is a ransomware. And I mean, here it's the broader category of malware, any kind of virus that gets into your computer. But the flavor of the month or the year at the moment is ransomware. A big famous one was something called WannaCry, which essentially, I mean, they all work in the same way. They get onto your computer, they encrypt your files, and then they say, ha, we've encrypted your files. If you want them back, pay us this ransom in Bitcoin and we'll unencrypt your files. They may or may not actually unencrypt the files. Typically, the way you deal with it is hopefully you've had good disaster recovery plans in place, and you've been backing up your data as you go, and you restore the data from backups, and you can be up and running again. So the cost of these sorts of things is obviously reputational damage. If it gets out there and people find out you've been hacked and things like that, that's in many ways a lesser cost. We see that in countries like the US, where Equifax, for example, had one of the biggest breaches of a consumer credit provider in the world. They're still in business. They took a big knock, but there's no such thing as bad press to a certain extent. But what all businesses suffer when an incident occurs, what we call business shock, is suddenly you have to stop doing your work and deal with this incident, and that's what causes problems. So the real question is, how do you safeguard against these things as an online business? There's two basic safeguards you want to have in place, and here we're drawing an analogy with the face masks in the corona times. It's something that protects you from a danger. So the one is the security policy. So this is a written document that, in the same way you have your plan of action for how you protect the privacy of data, you need to have a plan of action for how you secure your data. What methods you're using, it's assuring people that you're using encrypted connections to your website, your SSL certificates are up to date, things like that, that you're encrypting data appropriately. Those sorts of things are all things you would cover in your security policy. And the last element to bear in mind is your data processing agreement. We mentioned this before, but this is really this idea you are interconnected in a chain of people processing personal data. Whoever you're giving that data to, you also need to make sure that they're agreeing to the same security things you are, because your security can be great, and then one of your suppliers up the line has a problem, and they compromise the security of your data. I mean, let's just think about, you are now a online service provider providing your marketing, your gardening consulting services, and you have a marketing company who's handling your mailing list. Well, if they don't have good security practices, they get hacked and that marketing list gets leaked out there. Suddenly you're liable, and you need to make sure you have a contract with them regulating how they process personal data on your behalf. So that is security in a nutshell. I think we're almost at time. So Robert, I hope we've left you a few moments for questions, but that's about it from our side. I'll stop sharing the presentation. But yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much, David and Kevin. I must say, when we had the title for this webinar, called it Legal Bootcamp, it really it's true to the name. It was definitely a bootcamp, and I think you've packed in so much information and very relevant information. So that's definitely given us and the audience a lot to chew on, a lot to think about. So thank you very much for that. Just some general comments before we go into some last inputs from your side. I think what I took away a lot from what you're saying is, one, the responsibility actually goes both ways, from you as a business and the client. I think the clients or customers have certain responsibilities which they need to be aware of. Businesses have a lot to think about, especially businesses moving into the online space or expanding their current business, who might already be on the online space, but to a much larger extent. So there is a lot to think about, and I think it's quite unique, or maybe not unique, but relevant in the South African context, because we, relatively speaking to the international markets, we don't have such a big online business culture or sector, if I can call it that. And so the ability to navigate these spaces, I think, is becoming much more and more relevant, because I'll be honest, from a purely anecdotal side, the number of times I've just ticked a box for I agree to terms of reference, or went there and then see I've got to scroll through 58 paragraphs and subbullets. It's easy just to tick, but I think the awareness of what we are actually agreeing to when we enter into this online space, from both customer and from a business point of view, is quite critical for us, and responsible. We need to be responsible for us to navigate the space and understand it. So I just wanted to ask also, I mean, well, not ask, but say that I think generally, and I'm completely generalizing, there's this perception that when you get to matters of this kind of legality, you need to go to a legal firm or to lawyers. You should be a big company. But I think what I'm also hearing is that it's as important for small, micro, and medium-sized businesses to also have these kind of policies and these practices in place, because it's not like you reach a certain point where suddenly you flick a switch and then suddenly what about legal matters. And I am generalizing, but from my experience, I think that's possibly what very often happens. So I wanted to ask you, considering that these webinars that we're having are quite focused on the SME sector, I can just imagine what's going through someone's mind who's moving into the online space, or just about to expand. So would you say what would be the 2 or 3 critical things that you think a small business or a medium-sized business should consider? And then secondly, this may exist already. As you were talking, I thought there would be a wonderful opportunity to have a kind of ready-made toolkit to say, if you're moving to the space as a retailer, as a service provider, here's a toolkit, just add water kind of thing. So maybe some
totally.
advice to our SMEs on what those key critical aspects would be for them to look at.
Yeah, I mean, the critical three things you need, and they kind of go together, is terms of use, terms of service. Those kind of work together, and your privacy policy. And I mean, in terms of a toolkit, this is a problem that people in South Africa have faced for years, which is why we solved it. We've got free website terms on our website. There's one for an online store, there's one for an online service, and you really just go there, register, and download them. They are basic, but they have everything you need. So it's sort of clear, succinct, the nuts and bolts that get you up and running in terms of service, and privacy policy in terms of use. So many organizations out there, they go to a competitor, or they go to there's lots of US repositories of their kinds of legal terms out there where you can download stuff and stick them on your website. Trouble is, the US is a very different legal society from ours. It's very litigious. They have specific wording that they put in there for a reason. You're not doing yourself any favors by copying that sort of thing. Also, if you want to manage people's expectations, and if you see the role of terms of service to show people who you are and what you do, a kind of a clearer, more succinct one goes in there. And Kev, feel free to jump in terms of other things you need. But for me, that's your basic, right? Then other key things you need depend on what you are. If you're an online store, returns policy. That is going to help you so much. 90% of the disputes that you have with customers when it comes to an online store selling physical goods is to do with returns. Terms of service, so going to like an online service there, sometimes it's a refunds policy, but typically there it's more some sort of it's your orders, really. It's how you communicate to your subject what they're going to get for their service. That's where you want to concentrate on there. And then if you're providing some sort of marketplace or platform there, it's important that you have legal terms that specify to your different classes of users what you expect from them. So, let's go back to an example of your brokering transactions between gardeners and landscapers. Landscapers, here's how it works for you. I'm going to put up your plans on my website. For everyone I sell, I'm going to take 5%. You're going to get the rest. That's important. Whereas for the gardener, you're going to be able to download plans from us. You're going to be able to use them to customize your gardens. If you make a mistake and all your plants die, that's not our fault. Those are your critical things there. Anything else you want to add there, Kev?
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. I think the one thing that I would be very focused on is making sure that all of your documents are in plain language. And this goes broader than just saying words that are not legalese. It's more along the lines of making sure that the documents are easy to understand, that the relationships are easy to understand, that everything is actually very clear. And this is one of the big difficulties that I understand for small and medium-sized enterprises. You don't have the time, you often don't have the capacity to be able to go into these documents and tease out all of these relationships, tease out everything that needs to be said and said clearly. And you sometimes don't have the funds for a legal eye to be cast over. So what you end up doing is you take from these from your competitors or similar businesses, or businesses that are even quite different, or different jurisdictions, like David has said. And the problem with doing that is that is not clear, and that is not going to help you in managing this relationship between you and your users.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that's really great, and I think the more I'm listening, the more I also understand that one has to really move into the space and educate yourself along the line, because it's not something that it will be one big event and all the boxes are ticked. So people do move into the space gradually, and businesses do understand this landscape as time goes on. And actually, just one of the questions that had come up in the group, it's not particularly wasn't directly around the legalities of it, but you also mentioned earlier around the legal aspects of using social media. So there was a question from Mr. Dirk Brandt around using platforms like Facebook Marketplace or Instagram or LinkedIn and so on. So while all those are obviously relevant for the online marketplace or online business, from a legal perspective, maybe just as a closing comment from either of you, from a legal perspective, because I think social media is often kind of the first step people take into the online world when it comes to business. They start marketing, they start creating their profiles, their online presence, and their brand. So from a legal perspective, when you look at Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp for that matter.
Mm.
Are there any, is there any advice or just one or two key points
Yeah.
from how to use or engage with those platforms? So maybe just as a closing off point, last comments from your side on that.
So for me, you need to understand what the rules are of the platform that you're using, because a lot of people who aren't in the legal profession look at the law as this sort of bright, shiny thing that's going to protect you no matter what happens. And unfortunately, in the modern world, that's not how it works. And certainly these platforms, in many ways, something like Facebook produces more money than some countries, So to a certain extent, they make their own rules. And if you want to play on their playground, you've got to play by their rules, or they'll kick you out in 30 seconds. So as much as you need to understand the law extends to the rules of the platform and what they require.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, great stuff. I think we've reached time. So on that note, I just want to thank both Kevin and David from Michalsons very much for a really insightful and really valuable session. I think you've shared a huge amount of information and really covered all the bases in literally what was a legal bootcamp. Okay. So from our side, from the digital economy, thank you very much to you and Michalsons. And then just a few last things from our side, from the digital economy team. I'm just going to share my screen again. There we go. Just see, yeah, the screen should be up now. So to the audience, also thanks for joining us again today, and thanks for being with us and sharing in this knowledge shared by Michalsons. I think just shortly, in conclusion from our side, we have this webinar series, as you know, that runs every Wednesday at about 12:30, like today. And our upcoming sessions for June are going to cover topics like cybersecurity and data privacy. I think both Kevin and David were speaking a little bit about the POPI Act and GDPR and so on. So that's a space we'll move into a bit more. We're going to look at things in e-commerce such as on-demand retail and on-demand delivery, and then also online payment systems. So our June program is going to be quite an exciting one. And this legal bootcamp today got us off to a great start. It set the tone for what's to come. So please keep watching your email and social media for invitations to our upcoming webinars. And then if you want to view our previous webinars, the website is at the top of the page on your screens. We've had several over the past few weeks, so please feel free to go watch any of the old webinars which have been recorded, not old, but previous webinars that we've recorded. And then lastly, if you want to contact our unit at Digital Economy, you can do that at d.broadband@westerncape.gov.za, and then David and Kevin's email address is also on the screen. So they said you can contact them directly with any queries you have. So David and Kevin, just as we round off, is there any last information you want to share about upcoming sessions or webinars on your side before we say goodbye?
Thanks so much, Robert. Yeah, so online business, we're running a online program based on the content and legal bootcamp for your online business, but drawn out over about 4 weeks. That's going to be happening in August. And Michalsons, we also run lots of free webinars of our own. So have a look at our website, sign up for a mailing list if you're keen, and look forward to talking to you all more again very soon.
Excellent.
Yeah,
so thank you. Sorry, Kevin. Sorry.
Add in there that Robert, you mentioned a sort of like a pack that people could take that then they'd be able to sort of go and do it themselves and have all of their terms and stuff done. It's obviously very difficult to create something like that because of the various differences between all the different types of businesses and stuff on there. But we hope that in doing our presentation that David just mentioned over the next sort of the program over the next 4 weeks or so, that it will become something like that. We will try and sort of build something that people can use to empower themselves to be able to actually do things without the massive outlay that a lot of lawyers charge for things like this.
Yes, there will be templates available through that. But yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, Robert, for
really
having
helpful
us
to know. Thank you very much once again to our presenters and our panelists. Thank you very much to our audience for joining us today. it's great to know, although we don't speak directly, it's great to know you are out there and that you find value in these sessions. Please join us for our upcoming ones. And then to the digital economy team behind the scenes, thank you for everything going in leading up to setting these up. So from our side at DDAT and from Michalsons, everybody please keep safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.